A young waitress leaned across the counter, meeting the eyes of the man who looked entirely too expensive for this forgotten stretch of highway. "Hi, sir," she said, her voice worn down by the midnight shift. "My mother has a ring just like yours." This seemingly innocuous remark, delivered amid the clatter of plates, set off a chain reaction that would dismantle a billionaire's carefully constructed world. But what happened next will redefine everything. What if the most mundane conversation, whispered over weak coffee in a dusty small-town diner, held the key to a lineage hidden for decades? What if a simple silver band, etched with the pattern of enduring ivy, became not just a memento, but the solitary instrument capable of mending ancient family fractures and hauling long-buried, devastating truths into the light? This is a story steeped in the quiet agony of loss, the fierce necessity of love, and the resilient, unbreakable ties that tether souls together, even when those connections remain tragically unknown. James Thornton occupied the deepest corner booth at Rosie's Diner, a sanctuary of fading formica and the inescapable aroma of frying grease and stale cigarettes. Rosie's was the quintessential roadside stop. The coffee was a thick, muddy substance designed to wake the dead, the checkered linoleum floor stuck lightly to your shoes, and the clientele, truckers on long hauls, graveyard shift workers, and tired locals, were too preoccupied with their own exhaustion to spare a glance for the anomaly in the expensive, tailored Italian coat. James, 52, was a titan of industry, a man whose philanthropy was stamped onto the facades of hospital wings and the plaques of university lecture halls. Yet, in this moment, he was reduced to a ghost, cradling a lukewarm mug of coffee, desperate to outpace the specters of 3 years past. Claire, his vibrant, irreplaceable wife, had been violently stolen by a freeway pileup. Her absence had not only silenced her laughter but had rendered his sprawling estate a gilded cage and his heart an irreparable ruin. Since the tragedy, James had abandoned the urgency of boardrooms for the quiet despair of anonymous back roads. He sought the periphery of society, places where his staggering net worth was irrelevant, where human narratives were visceral and unvarnished. Rosie's Diner, sequestered just beyond a desolate stretch of upstate New York highway, was precisely this kind of refuge. It was a haven for transients and longtime residents, a place where secrets were universally known but courteously kept silent. James cherished the atmosphere. The heavy, chipped ceramic mugs, the butter-yellow wallpaper peeling gently at the seams, the way the relentless pressure of the outside world simply seemed to dissipate. He wasn't seeking sustenance. He sought ephemeral connections, the overheard fragments of ordinary lives that served as a painful, necessary reminder that his solitary grief was shared in countless permutations by others. Across the smoky expanse of the room, Emily Harper mechanically dragged a damp rag across the sticky counter, her movements practiced and economical. Her stained apron spoke of too many hours in the service industry, and the deep shadows under her brown eyes betrayed a profound, chronic exhaustion. At 28, Emily was a combat veteran turned single mother. The disciplined structure of her army service was years behind her, replaced by the chaotic grind of triple shifts and the demanding, perfect reality of her toddler, Lily, whose simple, toothy mama dissolved all weariness, making the struggle meaningful. Her life was a terrifyingly delicate high-wire act, mounting stacks of bills, a constantly leaking roof over their subsidized apartment, and a lingering, hollow ache in her chest for the mother she had lost, not to death, but to the slow, consuming fire of addiction many years prior. Emily rarely spoke Mary's name aloud, treating her memory almost as a sacred relic. That memory was physically embodied by a small silver ring she wore perpetually on a chain beneath her uniform shirt. It was intricately etched with a delicate ivy pattern, a quiet token of a familial life that had irrevocably vanished. James had registered her presence long before she even approached his table. It wasn't a conventional beauty that caught his eye. Rather, it was a striking, honest plainness and the quiet determination of her bearing. The way she moved with the efficiency of someone perpetually pushing forward, regardless of the invisible weight strapped to her shoulders. When she reached his booth to top off his perpetually cold coffee, her voice was gentle, yet completely devoid of hesitancy. "Hi, sir. My mother has a ring just like yours," she said, offering a slight nod toward the silver band he wore on his right hand. The words were intended as polite, idle banter, yet they slammed into James with the force of a derailing locomotive. His entire body locked. His grip automatically tightened on the cheap porcelain mug. That ring. It was Claire's. The twin of the band he had placed on her finger back when they were young, foolish, and blissfully unaware that immense wealth and soul-crushing tragedy would someday redefine them. It was a simple, elegant band, its surface intricately grooved with the pattern of climbing ivy. A private symbol of a love they had sworn would endure everything. "What did you just say?" he demanded, his voice dropping so low it was barely a rattling whisper. Emily paused, instantly sensing the abrupt and alarming shift in the atmosphere around him. "Your ring," she repeated, her fingers instinctively rising to the delicate silver chain hidden beneath her uniform. "It's exactly like my mom's. She wore it all the time. Said it was from someone very special." James's pulse hammered against his ribs. This could not be random chance. Not the specific, unmistakable ring. Not the unique, intertwined ivy etching. And certainly not the sudden, sickening certainty with which her words dredged up a memory he had meticulously buried for decades. "Your mother," he managed, calibrating his tone with painful precision. "What was her name?" "Mary," Emily replied, her voice softening at the memory. "Mary Harper." The name felt like a surgical incision deep into his chest. Mary Harper, Claire's inseparable childhood friend. The confidant who had navigated their awkward teenage years with them. The friend who had inevitably slipped away, pulled under by the relentless current of addiction. James had deliberately avoided thinking about her for 20 years. But now, her name was a taut, unbreakable thread, yanking him back into the epicenter of a past he had worked tirelessly to erase. Sleep was a meaningless concept. James spent the entire night perched on the edge of the hotel bed, the soft lighting failing to penetrate the gloom of his thoughts. Claire's ivy ring felt unnaturally heavy on his finger, a tangible anchor to the past. Mary Harper. The name resonated like a chime, resurrecting the ghosts of a forgotten era. A time before billions, before relentless grief, when he and Claire were simply two naive, recklessly optimistic teenagers in love, and Mary was the indispensable third pillar, sharing every secret and every burst of infectious laughter. They had been products of the same cramped, insular small town, where every face was known and youthful promises were mistakenly believed to be cast in stone. Mary, he recalled vividly, had possessed a raw, untamed vibrancy, her laugh capable of illuminating even the darkest corners, her loyalty ferocious. But fate had been brutally unkind. The crushing weight of poverty, a series of catastrophic decisions, and a devastating, years-long struggle with substance abuse had systematically dismantled her life. He recalled their wedding day, the last time he had truly seen her. She claimed to be sober, though her beautiful smile was strained, a mask of genuine effort. She had embraced Claire tightly, pressing a velvet box into her hand. Inside was the identical silver band, the twin of Claire's wedding ring, bearing the same intricate ivy pattern, a testament to their enduring, unbreakable sisterhood. "So you'll always have me with you?" Mary had whispered fiercely. Claire had never removed the ring until the day of the accident. But Mary's own existence had subsequently plunged into chaos. Claire had devoted years trying to intercept her fall. Endless financial support, paid for rehab stays, persistent, desperate phone calls. But addiction was a predatory entity that refused to relinquish its grasp. Eventually, Mary vanished completely, and Claire carried the crushing weight of guilt, convinced she hadn't done enough. When Claire died, James had interred that pervasive guilt alongside her, sealing away the agonizing details of their fractured history. Now, Emily's chance remark had violently pried open the vault. The following evening, James found himself inexorably drawn back to Rosie's. He couldn't articulate the compulsion. He only knew he required proximity to Emily, a tangible confirmation of the connection that felt too geometrically precise to be dismissed as mere coincidence. Tonight, the diner was a vibrant, noisy hub, thick with the rhythmic drone of hungry voices, but Emily navigated the chaos with the same weary, quiet dignity. When her eyes met his, she managed a small, tired smile, though a palpable question mark hung in her gaze. "Back again?" she asked, placing a new, steaming cup of coffee before him. "Couldn't stay away," James replied, forcing a lightness into his voice that he didn't feel. "That ring you mentioned has been bothering me." Emily's hand immediately rose to the silver chain at her throat, her fingers seeking the reassurance of the ring hidden beneath the polyester. "It's everything I have left of her," she admitted quietly. "She wasn't perfect. She had her demons. But she was my mother." James gave a tight, painful nod. His throat felt constricted. "Tell me about her." During a rare, fleeting moment of quiet on the floor, Emily sank into the booth across from him. She began to speak of Mary, of her mother's glorious past as a local singer, possessing a smoky voice that could effortlessly command a room. She spoke of the desperate, cyclical battles Mary waged to stay clean for Emily's sake, and the inevitable, crushing relapses into alcohol, or worse. The story culminated with the seismic event of Emily's 16th year, coming home to an eerily silent, vacant apartment, finding only the silver ring and a hastily scribbled note. "I'm sorry, Em. Keep this safe." From that moment onward, Emily had been solely responsible for her own survival, fighting tooth and nail, eventually joining the army to physically escape the town, only to return years later, a veteran with a daughter, Lily, and dreams that seemed to recede further with every passing shift. James absorbed every painful detail, his heart aching in sympathy. He recognized Claire's unyielding spirit mirrored in Emily's resilience, in the way she handled love and loss with the same raw honesty. But beneath the sympathy, a sharp, profound suspicion began to take root. The ring was not merely a keepsake. It was a central piece of a puzzle he had just unknowingly begun to assemble. For the duration of the following week, James established himself as a fixture at Rosie's. He occupied the same booth, drank the same bitter coffee, and patiently waited for moments of reprieve during Emily's shift. Their halting conversations gradually deepened, traversing the terrain of shared human experience, loss, ambition, and the sheer grit required for survival. James cautiously revealed carefully curated fragments of his life with Claire, the spectacular rise of their shared empire, and the crushing truth that even immense fortune could not shield them from the shadow of her death. He admitted he had voluntarily relinquished everything except the consuming nature of his grief. Emily, in turn, spoke more freely of Lily, her 3-year-old daughter, a toddler with her grandmother's wistful brown eyes, and the profound, solitary burden of raising her. But the silver ring remained the central, undeniable thread. James could not discard the mathematical problem it presented. He began constructing a timeline within his mind. Mary's disappearance, Claire's residual guilt, the subsequent years of silence. Late one evening, after the last patron had stumbled out and the cleaning was underway, James finally posed the question that had been searing itself into his consciousness since their first exchange. "Emily," he began, his voice surprisingly steady despite the urgency tightening his chest. "When was your mother born?" She frowned, momentarily thrown off guard by the abrupt, deeply personal query. "Why do you ask?" James's breath hitched violently. Mary was merely a year older than Claire, but the chronology was violently misaligned. Emily was 28, making her birth year 1997. James and Claire had been married in 1995. Claire had never once mentioned a child, yet Mary had been tenuously connected to their lives during that period, always drifting in and out of crises. A memory, sharp and cold, pierced his consciousness. Claire weeping inconsolably after a late night, hushed phone call from Mary, repeating the desolate phrase that she had failed her, but adamantly refusing to provide details. "Emily," James asked, his voice now a desperate murmur, "did your mother ever speak about my wife, Claire Thornton?" Emily's eyes widened slightly in recognition. "Claire? Yes, sometimes. She said they were the absolute best of friends growing up, like genuine sisters. Mom always got extremely sad when she talked about her, like she truly believed she had let her down." James's hands began to shake uncontrollably. He withdrew his phone and navigated rapidly to a picture of Claire. Young, radiant, smiling into the camera, her identical ivy ring sparkling faintly on her left hand. Emily inhaled sharply, a quiet gasp escaping her lips. "That's her," she whispered, tears immediately welling. "That's the Claire my mom idolized." The pieces of the narrative were now flying into place, yet they formed an impossibly horrifying picture. James knew he couldn't rely on conjecture. He needed brutal, unassailable facts. James immediately engaged the services of a private investigator, a man renowned for his silent efficiency and discretion, whom he had utilized in countless business transactions. James supplied the sparse but potent details: Mary Harper's name, Emily's birth year, and the inescapable significance of the ivy ring. It took only 4 agonizing days for the investigator to return with a confidential file that instantaneously fractured James's reality. The documentation confirmed Emily's birth in 1997, but the birth certificate listed a father James had never heard of. A transient placeholder, a mere footnote in Mary's chaotic life. But the most damning evidence was located deep within the county archives. A carefully preserved letter, penned by Mary to Claire in 1996. It was heartbreakingly brief, yet utterly calamitous. "I'm pregnant, Claire. It's his. I can't tell him. He's married to you now. I'm sorry." James reread the letter obsessively, the paper crinkling in his white-knuckled grip as his world violently destabilized. Claire had known. His beloved wife had known that her best friend was carrying his child, and she had meticulously guarded the secret from him for over 2 decades. Why? Was it a desperate attempt to shield him from scandal or responsibility? Was it to preserve the delicate sanctity of their marriage? Or had Mary, fearing his reaction, begged Claire for absolute silence? The truth was a lacerating wound, profound and agonizing, but it brought with it an overwhelming, irreversible realization. Emily Harper, the weary waitress serving cold coffee, was his daughter. James found himself unable to return to the diner the following day. He simply couldn't look Emily in the eyes, not while the molten core of the truth threatened to burst from his chest. He retreated to the sterile confines of his hotel room, walking relentless circuits, the damning letter balled in his fist. His emotions were a chaotic storm. Rage at Claire for the staggering concealment, frustration with Mary for her choice to flee, and crushing self-condemnation for his lifelong blindness. But above all, he felt profound terror. Emily had navigated life alone, deprived of a paternal relationship and family stability, all due to decisions that had been made without his knowledge. When he finally reappeared at Rosie's, it was late, the diner nearly deserted, quiet save for the hiss of the fryers cooling down. Emily was meticulously polishing tables, her usual efficient movements replaced by a visible sluggishness, as if she were wrestling with an invisible burden of her own. Seeing him, her face momentarily brightened, only to immediately cloud over with concern. "Are you okay?" she asked. James drew a shaky breath, the moment of reckoning upon them. "Emily, we need to talk." They sat together in the corner booth, 2 rings. His on his finger, hers secreted beneath her shirt, symbolically glinting under the harsh fluorescent glare. He revealed everything. Mary's desperate confession letter, Claire's protective secret, and the undeniable truth of his paternity. Emily listened without interrupting, her face draining of color, her hands gripping the edge of the table so tightly her knuckles were white. When he finished, tears were silently tracing paths through the grease and fatigue on her cheeks, yet her voice remained remarkably composed. "You're saying you're my father?" she asked, the words sounding alien, almost foreign on her tongue. James nodded, tears finally stinging his own eyes. "I didn't know, Emily. I swear on Claire's life I never knew." A suffocating silence descended, heavy and intensely personal. Then, Emily erupted from the booth, her chair scraping violently across the linoleum, and she walked stiffly toward the back exit. James did not pursue her. He understood. She needed air, solitude, and time to process a lifetime of redefined history, just as he did. But the truth was a released weapon, and there was no mechanism to retrieve it. Days stretched into weeks. Emily did not resign, but she maintained a rigid, professional distance, meticulously avoiding James's corner booth. Her smiles were brittle, her conversation clipped and strictly transactional. James, however, remained a steadfast fixture. He wasn't there to pressure her. He was there because he had already endured the agonizing loss of Claire, and now that he had found this new connection, he would not yield it unless explicitly rejected. One cold evening, as the season's first delicate snow began to settle against the diner windows, Emily approached his table. She did not sit. Instead, she slowly unclasped the chain from her neck, holding out the silver ring. "I've been thinking," she began, her voice hoarse with unshed emotion, "about Mom, about Claire, and about you. I am angry, profoundly angry at the magnitude of this deceit and loss. But I refuse to stay angry anymore." James looked up, a tentative, fragile spark of hope igniting in his chest. "What do you want, Emily?" "I want to know you," she stated simply, meeting his gaze directly. "Not the billionaire, not the anonymous man in the high-priced coat. Just you. And I need you to know Lily. She deserves a grandfather." It was not total forgiveness, not yet. But it was the only foundation they needed. Over the next month, James and Emily painstakingly began reconstructing the familial bond that had been severed before it ever had the chance to exist. He was introduced to Lily, a mesmerizing blur of corkscrew curls and infectious giggles. In her smile, James saw the faint echo of Claire. In her deep brown eyes, he recognized Mary. He handled Emily's insurmountable financial debt, not as corporate charity, but as a silent, immediate act of paternity, and slowly, cautiously, she allowed him past the barricades she had built. They spent hours discussing Mary and Claire, analyzing the mistakes, the sacrifices, and the profound love that had ultimately defined their interconnected lives. In an act of deep, lasting tribute, James funded a substantial community center dedicated in Mary's name, a safe harbor offering comprehensive support for individuals battling addiction, an endeavor to honor the woman who, despite her struggles, had gifted him a daughter he never knew. Emily, finally liberated from relentless financial pressure, enrolled in night classes, daring to dream of a future beyond the perpetually sticky floors of the diner, and James was her most unwavering champion. A year later, James again sat in the corner booth at Rosie's diner, but his solitude was gone. Emily was seated opposite him, Lily nestled comfortably in her lap, painstakingly coloring a crude drawing of a cheerful house surrounded by a giant, vibrant tree. Their rings, his and Emily's, still caught the light, enduring symbols of a past rife with pain that had, miraculously, managed to heal. The diner's appearance was utterly unchanged, but they were fundamentally different people, linked now by a shattering truth that had threatened destruction, but instead had delivered a complete, unexpected family. As Lily's laughter echoed sweetly and Emily offered a genuine, unburdened smile, James experienced a depth of feeling he hadn't known since Claire's death. True, unconditional peace. The wealth he had obsessively pursued, the corrosive grief he had carried, the secrets that once defined his isolation, they were all facets of his history. But they no longer constituted his entire self. The actual, immeasurable wealth was right here, in the clear, joyful laughter of a little girl, in the fierce strength of the daughter he had finally found, and in the profound courage required to begin life anew. As a gentle, melancholic tune drifted from the old jukebox, James understood that this redemption, this stitching back together of love, one simple diner conversation at a time, was exactly what Claire would have ultimately wanted for them all.